My name is Olivia Taylor, and what I'm about to tell you could forever change the way you see the world. For over 20 years, I worked as a professional astrologer, guiding people through the stars and planetary alignments. I thought I had all the answers about the universe, but everything changed on March 14th, 2024. That day, I died. I was clinically dead for 7 minutes, and what I saw on the other side transformed my existence forever. Jesus Christ himself appeared before me and revealed a powerful secret related to the mysterious M-shaped mark on human hands. The message I received was urgent, and now I feel compelled to share it with the world. It was an unforgettable rainy morning. I remember it clearly because that day started like any other. I had 2 appointments scheduled for the afternoon and was preparing a detailed astrological chart for a famous client. My life was stable, even successful. Little did I know that on that day, my destiny would change forever. I was running late that morning. My assistant Sarah called me worried, reminding me of an interview scheduled with a local radio station. "Olivia, don't forget they want to talk about your predictions for the next lunar cycle," she said in an anxious tone. I laughed carelessly and replied confidently, "Relax, Sarah. It's not my first interview." I left the apartment in a hurry, holding my coffee in one hand and trying to mentally review the astrological information I would discuss on the show. The rain was pouring down hard, making the streets slippery and dangerous. I reached the crosswalk between 7th Avenue and the main street. The traffic light was flashing red, but my attention wasn't on it. Suddenly, I felt my cell phone vibrate, and instinctively I looked down. It was at that exact moment that I heard a deafening noise, tires skidding, bright lights coming toward me, and the brutal crash of metal against flesh. My body was thrown into the air, and all I felt was a sharp, biting cold as I collided with the ground. The last thing I heard before everything went dark were desperate screams all around me. Then, absolute silence. I thought that was the end, but I was mistaken. It was the beginning of something much deeper. Suddenly, I became aware of an absolute silence, a silence I had never experienced before. The rain, the screams, the sounds of the street, everything had completely disappeared. I felt myself floating, light, without pain or suffering, as if my physical body had been left behind, yet my consciousness was still fully alive. I opened my eyes, or at least that's what I thought I had done, and I clearly saw my own body lying on the asphalt. There were paramedics around me, desperately trying to revive me. I heard one of them shout, "She's not breathing, start compressions," while another hurriedly prepared a defibrillator. I also saw Sarah on the sidewalk in shock, with her hands covering her face, tears streaming down her cheeks. But, strangely, I felt no fear or panic. On the contrary, I was filled with an absolute calm. "What is happening to me?" I whispered, even though I no longer had a mouth to utter those words. I was fully aware, yet separated from my body. It was at that moment that I finally realized I had died. At that very moment, a golden light appeared above me. It wasn't just bright. It seemed to pulse with its own life, radiating love in an indescribable way. Uncontrollably, I began to slowly float toward it, drawn by an invisible and irresistible force. The closer I got, the more intense and welcoming that light became. Around it I could see luminous shapes, figures emanating the same golden energy, and they were singing melodies I had never heard before. It wasn't ordinary music, it was celestial, perfect not only in sound but also in emotion, as if the notes could touch my soul directly, filling it with absolute peace and deep understanding. A gentle yet powerful voice called my name, Olivia. It wasn't a request or an order. It was a kind invitation, filled with authority and love. "Come," said the voice, and I, without hesitation, simply followed it. As I got closer and closer to that intense light, my consciousness hovered above the accident scene, intently watching the paramedics trying to resuscitate my body. I saw one of them place the defibrillator paddles on my chest, shouting, "Get back," as my body violently reacted to the electric shock. Still, nothing changed. I remained lifeless. But now everything seemed extremely clear and detailed. I could even notice the rain falling slowly on the asphalt, the scratches on the paramedic's wristwatch, and the frantic sound of Sarah's anguished breathing, even though I was no longer physically present. Then I noticed something even more intriguing. My own hands were before me, translucent and slightly glowing. On the palm of my left hand, there was a subtle yet perfectly visible symbol, a clear mark in the shape of an M, which seemed to vibrate gently with its own light. Intrigued, I raised my hand to get a better look, and I asked out loud, even though no one could hear me, "What is this?" At that moment, I heard the same soft, deep voice behind me again. "Now, can you see?" I slowly turned, and there he was. Jesus stood before me, tall, majestic, radiating a light brighter than the sun itself. His eyes were serene and welcoming, yet they carried the depth of eternity. "Lord," I murmured, moved and completely awestruck by his presence. "Yes," he replied calmly, "it is not your imagination." Jesus slowly walked toward me and gently touched my hand. The moment he touched me, I felt a warm energy coursing through my entire being. Under his touch, the mark on my palm began to glow intensely, taking on a life of its own. "You have always carried this mark," he gently explained. "It symbolizes purpose and spiritual identity. But soon, the enemy will try to corrupt it." The light surrounding Jesus intensified even more, and I felt a strong pull drawing me closer to him. The celestial melody grew more intense, blending with the luminous vibration that filled that space. However, with a slight gesture of his hand, Jesus halted the force that was drawing me in. "There is something important you need to understand," he continued solemnly. "This mark on your hand is not exclusive. Many of my children have it, although few know its true meaning." Curious and moved, I raised my hand again and asked, "But why does it have that M shape?" Jesus smiled gently, replying with sweetness and firmness, "It represents many things: Messiah, mission, miracle. But soon the world will see this mark distorted, and the enemy will use it to lead many souls astray." A chill ran through my soul. "What do you mean by that?" I asked, apprehensive. Jesus' expression grew more serious, almost somber. "Everything will begin as progress, a seemingly perfect technology designed to solve humanity's greatest problems, but it will come at a very high price." Before I could speak again, Jesus continued, "People will willingly accept a mark similar to the one you carry now. They will receive this mark in the name of security and comfort, but it will be a fraud, an imitation created by the enemy." Even without a physical body, I felt my heart race in anguish. "And what will happen to those who accept that mark?" I asked in a trembling voice. His eyes softened, revealing compassion, yet his seriousness remained. "They will be separated from me. This mark will alter them spiritually, not just physically. Their hearts will harden, and they will lose the ability to hear my voice. Remember," Jesus continued, his voice laden with tenderness and sorrow, "the mark will represent a final choice: to trust the systems created by men or to trust in me." I wanted to ask more, to better understand that urgent and disturbing revelation. But before I could say anything, the light around us began to fade, and I felt that force pulling me away again. Jesus then held my hand firmly, saying with authority and love, "You need to warn them. Tell them everything you saw, everything I told you. Share the truth before it's too late." In an instant, that golden light vanished completely, and I felt as if I were falling at high speed. The celestial melody faded, replaced by the sound of my own breath, desperately trying to catch air. Then, I suddenly opened my eyes and realized that I was alive again, surrounded by doctors, nurses, and the frantic noise of machines in the hospital. I survived, but I did not return as the same person. In the moment I stood before Jesus, I realized that he was real in a way I had never imagined. He wasn't a distant figure from ancient stories or paintings. He was a living presence, more real than anything I had ever known. His face shone with a light that didn't blind me, but rather filled me with a profound, indescribable peace. His eyes, filled with eternity, looked directly at me with a tenderness so deep that I felt both completely exposed and utterly safe. "Olivia," he said in a soft voice that flowed like a warm breeze through my spirit, "you are not here by chance." I felt my legs weaken, but I did not fall. I wasn't sure if I still had a body. I only knew I was in the presence of the Son of God. With a trembling voice I asked, "Lord, is this heaven?" Jesus smiled gently and replied affectionately, "Not yet, but you were brought here for a reason." Jesus then took a step toward me and extended his hand. When I looked down, I saw my own hands again, translucent and shining, with the M-shaped mark pulsating intensely, perfectly in tune with the light emanating from him. When he touched my hand, a current of soft, welcoming energy ran through my entire being, as if every cell were being filled with new life. "With tenderness," he explained, "you have always carried this mark, Olivia. Now it is time to understand its true meaning." With tears welling in my eyes, I asked, overwhelmed, "What is that meaning, Lord?" Jesus stepped back gently, his gaze filled with love and seriousness, and replied, "This mark is a symbol of spiritual authority and divine connection. It identifies those chosen to fulfill a heavenly purpose, but soon the enemy will try to copy it and many will be deceived." My heart raced with anxiety. "What do you mean by that?" I asked, distraught. Jesus' expression grew darker and more serious as he said, "What you are about to witness will not be easy, but you must remember this: I will always be with you. Do not be afraid." He then raised his hand, and the light around us began to change. Vivid images appeared in the space between us, like an extremely realistic projection. I saw a crowd of thousands of people forming lines, patiently waiting for something that looked like a small device or chip implanted directly into the palm of their hand. And as they received that mark, the same letter, M, clearly appeared on their hands. "They believe they are receiving progress," Jesus said sadly, "but in reality, they are accepting chains." A shiver ran down my soul as I watched in horror the people smiling as they accepted the device, convinced that it was a medical breakthrough, the perfect solution for problems like financial fraud, identity theft, and health. I watched with sadness as a man in a suit addressed the enthusiastic crowd. "This mark will protect you. No more lost documents, stolen cards, or fraud. This is the next step in human evolution." Beside me, Jesus observed everything with a firm expression and calmly explained, "It will start as convenience, but quickly it will become absolute control." The images continued, revealing people who refused the mark being prevented from buying food, accessing medical services, and even managing their bank accounts. Guards controlled the entrances to stores and establishments, scanning people's hands before allowing them entry. "At first it will be optional," Jesus stated in a tone full of warning. "Then it will become mandatory. Finally, it will be the law." Then I saw a young woman approaching an entrance accompanied by her little daughter. As they passed through the scanner, the girl's hand did not bear the mark, and an alarm immediately sounded. A guard approached them and said coldly, "I'm sorry, ma'am, but without registration, there is no entry." Hesitant, but pressured by the situation, the mother gently took the child's hand and accepted the mark, not out of fear, but convinced that she was protecting her daughter, believing that it was progress. Jesus looked deeply at me and spoke with sadness in his voice. "Many will be deceived. Even those who know the scriptures. The mark will not come with horns or fire. It will come with a friendly smile and promises of peace and security." My hand trembled as I stared at the pulsating mark on my palm. Overwhelmed and confused, I asked Jesus, "Why is the Lord showing me all of this?" His gaze softened even more, filled with love and compassion, and he replied gently, "Because you need to warn them. You must alert them about the danger that is approaching." The scene changed again, revealing great cities dominated by technology and impeccable organization. Everything was connected to the mark. A simple gesture of the hand was enough to open doors, make payments, or use transportation. Life seemed ideal, perfectly comfortable, yet I could clearly sense the profound and distressing spiritual absence that permeated that world. Then, Jesus showed me the other side of that reality. The people who refused the mark were living on the fringes of the system. They formed small communities, growing their own food and bartering to survive. Despite being treated as outcasts and facing many hardships, I could clearly see that Jesus was present among them. Those who refuse the mark will face challenges, Jesus told me in an encouraging voice, but they will also experience my miraculous provision. Just as I fed the Israelites in the desert, I will care for my people. With my own eyes, I witnessed miracles in these communities. Food multiplied, the sick were healed, and children grew up healthy even with limited resources. Angels surrounded these people, protecting them from all harm. But then the vision changed again, revealing those who had accepted the mark. Their faces were empty, their eyes completely lifeless. They were not controlled by something external. They were being spiritually emptied from within. With deep sadness, Jesus explained, "The mark will not affect only the body, but primarily the soul. It will sever the connection with me, harden their hearts, and darken their minds." In that painful vision, I saw a man kneeling on the ground, desperately crying out, "God, please help me." But there was no response at all. His spiritual connection was completely lost. Tears burned in my eyes as I asked Jesus, anguished, why would people do something like this? Because they will believe it is the right decision, Jesus replied with sorrow. They will choose convenience over faith, comfort over truth. And once they accept the mark, there will be no turning back. Then I observed political leaders on large stages, celebrating an alleged new era of world peace amid fervent applause from the crowd. But Jesus showed me the truth behind the facade. Those people had stopped praying, stopped questioning. They followed orders without thinking, spiritually empty. "The mark will not be imposed by force, Olivia," Jesus said firmly, "but those who refuse it will suffer great persecution." I then saw a desperate man standing outside a store, pleading for food. "Please," he said, extending his hand, "my children are starving." A security guard coldly denied him, without any emotion. "Without the mark, no service." The man, outraged and distressed, retorted, "But it's just a mark." To which the guard replied curtly, "Exactly." I saw leaders proclaiming with reassuring smiles that the mark had nothing to do with religion, claiming it was merely a technological tool. "It doesn't mean you're denying God," they asserted with conviction. Jesus then warned me gravely, "That is the great lie. The mark will not be about technology, but about trust. People will have to choose between trusting men or trusting me." I observed Christians deeply divided between survival and their faith. Many succumbed to the pressure, while others remained steadfast despite the hardships. These resistors were persecuted, treated as dangerous rebels, imprisoned, or forced to live in hiding. Yet even in these dark and difficult places, God's presence remained strong, bringing hope and consolation to those who stayed faithful. My heart tightened in the face of so much suffering, and I anxiously asked, "Lord, what should they do?" Jesus took my hand again, firmly and lovingly, and replied clearly, "They need to strengthen their faith now. They must form communities, learn to live outside this system, and trust completely that I will take care of them." With a trembling voice, I asked again, "And if they cannot, Lord?" His gaze darkened, revealing the gravity of the moment. "Then they will fall into deception, and their souls will be in eternal danger." The vision changed once more, and now I was facing a gigantic city, incredibly modern and luminous. Tall buildings, clean streets, and an apparently perfect environment, with no visible violence or suffering. But beside me, Jesus warned seriously, "This is the false peace that will deceive many. They will think they have achieved prosperity through human advancements, but beneath this shining surface, there will be a profound spiritual darkness." I watched intently as people passed their hands over censers to enter stores, hospitals, schools. Everything depended entirely on that mark. A young mother, holding a small child in her arms, approached a supermarket, and her face fell in despair when she was prevented from entering because she did not have the mark. "Please, I just need some milk for my child," she pleaded, but the attendant remained impassive. "No registration, no entry. Sign up today, it's quick and easy." On a nearby screen, a smiling man enthusiastically announced, "Come into the future. With the mark, your life will be much simpler and safer." Shocked by this disturbing scene, I looked at Jesus and sadly asked, "Why will so many people accept this?" He responded with a serious, compassionate look, "Because it won't come as oppression, but as progress. It will be presented as the solution to humanity's greatest problems: poverty, disease, security, and even climate change." Suddenly, I saw a group of religious leaders publicly defending the use of the mark. "It's not something bad. It's not the mark of the beast. It's a blessing from God to take care of the poor and heal the sick." I looked at Jesus in horror, and he nodded. "Sadly, yes, even some of my own will be deceived, expecting a sign of evident evil, when in fact the mark will come with a smile and promises of peace." The vision grew even darker. I saw soldiers at checkpoints, scanning people in airports, borders, and train stations. Those without the mark were separated and treated with disdain, facing immense psychological pressure. A young man refused, courageously arguing with an officer, "You can't force me to accept this." The soldier replied coldly, "Of course you're not forced, but without the mark, you don't work, you don't travel, you don't buy or sell. The decision is yours." Defeated by the situation, the young man slowly walked toward the registration booth. When his hand was marked, his gaze immediately turned empty and distant, as if his soul had just been extinguished. "It's not just about physical control," Jesus said in a firm, pained voice, "but about spiritual control." The scene shifted once more, revealing a man kneeling in a dark room, crying out in despair. "God forgive me, I didn't know," he pleaded, remorseful. But there was no longer any connection with heaven. His spirit was completely disconnected. Jesus explained sadly, "Once the mark is accepted, the connection with me is permanently severed. It is not something that can be reversed. It is a final decision." Still disturbed by the visions, I asked with tears in my eyes, "But why can't they simply repent and turn back?" Jesus, with deep sadness in his voice, calmly replied, "Because the mark will change their heart and soul. It isn't a matter of technology, but rather a spiritual decision, a final act of trust, choosing the world over me." Then I saw a new image, long lines forming once again. But now people weren't just seeking the mark. They wanted upgrades for their bodies, eyes with enhanced vision, increased physical strength, superior intelligence. It was presented as the next step in human evolution. With a heavy look, Jesus explained, "Humanity will become less human, and its connection with me will be severed, not because I will reject them, but because they will no longer be able to feel my presence." Shocked by it all, I desperately asked, "Is there any way to prevent this from happening?" With sweetness and firmness, Jesus softly replied, "Yes, they must choose me before the mark comes." Then Jesus showed me two clearly distinct paths. On one side were those who refused the mark, living in simple, self-sufficient communities. They grew their own food, raised animals, and exchanged goods among themselves. Life was not easy, but it was free and full of hope. On the other side were those who accepted the mark. They had all the comforts, access to the best medical treatments, financial security, and extraordinary technological advances. However, their eyes were empty, as if their souls no longer existed. They lived like lifeless bodies, wandering the earth without any spiritual connection. It may seem easy to choose, Jesus explained with deep seriousness in his voice, between comfort or suffering, security or uncertainty, but those who choose comfort will pay a much higher price. Then Jesus showed me two clearly distinct paths. On one side were those who refused the mark, living in simple, self-sufficient communities. They grew their own food, raised animals, and exchanged goods among themselves. Life was not easy, but it was free and full of hope. On the other side were those who accepted the mark. They had all the comforts, access to the best medical treatments, financial security, and extraordinary technological advances. However, their eyes were empty, as if their souls no longer existed. They lived like lifeless bodies, wandering the earth without any spiritual connection. It may seem easy to choose, Jesus explained with deep seriousness in his voice, between comfort or suffering, security or uncertainty. But those who choose comfort will pay a much higher price. I then saw small communities of the faithful scattered in various places, hidden in simple houses, barns and caves. They were praying together, reading the scriptures, and singing songs filled with faith. Their faces, despite the hardships, reflected genuine peace. Children shared bread with the elderly, and miracles occurred naturally. Fields blossomed without irrigation. The sick were healed after fervent prayers, and angels protected these places, rendering them invisible to the eyes of those who persecuted them. Jesus assured me firmly and compassionately, those who remain faithful will not be alone. I will care for them myself, just as I did with my people in the desert, but many will choose the easier path and be deceived. My tears flowed freely under the weight of this revelation. Jesus gently touched my face and insisted, "You need to tell the world what you saw, Olivia. Many will not believe you, but your mission is to warn them while there is still time." I looked into his eyes. For the last time, feeling myself being pulled away quickly, I cried out desperately, "I'm not ready. I need to know more." But Jesus smiled with tenderness and calm, saying, "You have seen enough. Now go and share this truth." Suddenly, everything went dark again. The golden light disappeared, and the celestial music gave way to the distressing sound of hospital machines. I opened my eyes, feeling a deep pain in my chest as I breathed. Doctors and nurses surrounded me, and I heard someone exclaim in relief, "She's back, she's breathing." Sarah ran over to me, crying with emotion, "Olivia, you're alive. My God, you're alive." I was exhausted but determined, and when a nurse asked me to rest, I shook my head firmly and said, "No, not yet. I have a lot of work to do." I looked again at the palm of my left hand. There, the M-shaped mark was still visible, albeit faintly. A constant reminder of the mission Jesus had entrusted to me. I knew exactly what needed to be done. I had to tell the world what I saw because time was running out quickly.